Good morning. This is Devin Foley, and welcome to another episode of First Tuesday Conservatives Countdown to the Election, co-hosted by Alpha News and Charlemagne Institute, of which I am the CEO. Charlemagne publishes Intellectual Takeout and Chronicles magazine. Today, we have a special guest with us, Senator Paul Gazelka, who has been serving his constituents for quite a while now, starting back in 2004. So he's here to give us a little background on why he does what he does, why he cares so much, and what he's seeing out there on the ground. Senator Gazelka, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Devin, good to be on.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit. I mean, you jumped into politics 2004, well, a little bit before that, I would suspect. Where does the passion come from? What drove you to get yourself involved and put yourself out there in the public eye?
You know, I was just a church-going businessman, married, 5 children, not looking for politics. Politics came looking for me. The former rep sought me out and said he wasn't going to be seeking re-election and asked if I would run in his place. And that's really how it started. It was a very prayerful decision for my wife and I, having a business, having 5 kids at home. It was like, is this what we should do? But we really felt like it was our responsibility to enter the fray, and it is a fray. I got unelected, frankly, 2 years later, and then sat out for 4 years. But now I've served in the Senate for 10. And frankly, I had planned to be done. I also hadn't planned to be the majority leader. And so I'm committed to at least 2 more years and hopefully as majority leader.
Very good. Very good. Oh, it's just for people who don't realize what it's like to step out into that public eye, especially in a state that's generally unfriendly to Republicans and conservatives. It's a big risk, especially with the big family and with the loving wife, all of that. So thank you for that.
Yeah, in fact, they've picketed my office twice since I've been an elected servant. One of the reasons was when we had a big budget shortfall years ago, I had to build to freeze state workers' wages, and that got them riled up. This year it was because we were not going to defund or dismantle the police. So the Black Lives Matter crowd came to my office, and that part of it is I never really appreciate. I mean, it's something that's just like, why don't you just meet us at the Capitol? We'll meet everyone, and that has really turned. It's sour for a lot of people that are stepping into this fray because whether they picket your home or your personal life in any way, I just don't think it's warranted either side of the aisle.
It's very unnerving, and I think it's a reflection of the left's approach to this. Their approach to the culture war is that it is a total war. There is not any stone that will be left unturned, and everything is fair game in a total war. And so thank you for taking the risks, putting yourself out there, and doing your best to serve your constituents as well as Minnesota, especially as Senate Majority Leader. So as you were out there, you just talked about defunding the police, but out of curiosity, when you're out talking to constituents, when you're talking to other senators, what are the 2 or 3 top issues that Minnesotans are worried about right now?
I think certainly that their streets are safe is, I think, number one, particularly in the suburbs and Minneapolis St Paul. Frankly, in rural Minnesota, they just think it should naturally happen. There's a real respect for the police officers in rural Minnesota, and not enough, frankly, in Minneapolis St Paul. And so that's a big issue. And I've said over and over, we're never going to defund or dismantle the police. I think that's a big deal. People want their kids back in school. The governor has locked down education basically and set the parameters up because of COVID that they really can't be in the classroom, which we think is critical. That's another big issue. Certainly COVID is an issue. Anybody that's afraid of it, very, very concerned. And we've never said it's not a serious virus. We just say you got to live your life through it. So that's a big issue. And then the last one that we hear is about the budget. Frankly, as a result of the governor's shutdown of everything, we went from a $2 billion plus surplus to over $2 billion deficit. And so now we've got to figure out how to balance that budget.
And that's a lot of folks in public employees don't see themselves as people who should have to take a cut quite often. And whereas the private sector is used to the, the ups and downs and the travails of business and economy and all of that type stuff taking place. Now,
Well, yeah,
Jerry,
let me jump in on that too, because we had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people left unemployed as a result of COVID. And we felt like the state workers who, they serve us in their capacity, we felt like they should get a raise from a year ago, July, but not last July. So we in the Senate passed legislation that gave them a raise. That this was in May, so it gave them a raise from the prior July, but said they should not get one this July. And the governor just totally disregarded what we said and gave them a raise this July. And so you think about that, all of these many hundreds of thousands of people laid off, no money coming in, and then you gave the state workers a raise right in the middle of the pandemic. Very frustrated, and I thought it was not a good use of the resources, especially when we had a shortfall already.
no, absolutely. That's very frustrating, actually. And I'm doing my best to contain my irritation with it. I mean, I look around and especially people who are in service industries, restaurants, hospitality, they're taking a complete thrashing. As well as, you've got other businesses that are seeing revenue down, layoffs are taking place, or companies are saying, we've got to go down 10% pay or take a 25% pay cut to be able to get through all of this. And for public employees to sort of assume that they're just entitled to all of this, no matter what happens in the private sector, that's not the mentality of a public servant. That is somebody who's looking, caring most for their own interests. And so
And I point most of it at their unions. The same thing with teachers. There's a lot of good teachers, but the teachers union fights for things that they should not. I mean, they're fighting, for example, for kids not to be in school, even though 85% of parents and kids want their kids in school. And the data is, I think we have one person under age 20 has died of COVID. So it's not a threat to young people. And yet we're going to keep them out of school. And it's absolutely essential, but it's the teachers union that puts the pressure on to not open up the schools. And that's who the governor's listening to.
Right. And this, of course, goes back even FDR was against public employee unions because of that issue, that there really isn't a true negotiation between a public employee union and the executive branch, who's being perhaps funded in part for campaigns and other things by those same unions. And no, it's a tough spot. It strikes things.
Let me hit that one too, because the blue collar union workers actually are coming more and more over to the Republican side because they know that we're the ones protecting their jobs. The Line 3 pipeline up north, copper nickel mining, taconite mining. I mean, all over the place, we've got these people that are now joining ranks of Republicans. They're supporting Trump. They're giving money into the Senate Republicans. And I think that's the alliance that we'll see in the future, where businesses and the trades are working together against the people that actually want to stop all of these jobs. And that's just what you said. FDR said public unions he did not support because there was no safety net. They could just keep asking for more taxes, which is what they do. The private unions, if they ask for too much and that business fails, they all lose their jobs. And so it's a different relationship.
Yeah, it really is. So on that, we've been watching for the last 4 to 6 years, especially with the Iron Range, and it seems to be a sea change taking place up there. I know, I think it was about 6 or 7 mayors made a lot of news by endorsing President Trump. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing up in the Iron Range, and is this change going to be limited just to President Trump and how he seems to appeal to blue collar workers and the guys that get their hands dirty, or do you see this as something that will last beyond President Trump?
This is a sea change. In the Senate Republicans, we started over 7 years ago reaching out to the blue collar unions. I'm a Ranger. I'm from Virginia, Minnesota. So I worked at Mintech one summer, one of the taconite mines up there. And so we've been actively reaching out to them. Frankly, the two Democrat senators up there are vote with us far more than they vote with the Metro Democrats. In fact, they threw out of power Senator Tom Bach, the minority leader, because he was too moderate, and so there is absolutely a change. Congressman Pete Stauber is going to win up there. I think even Jason Lewis on the range is going to win. So it's Trump all the way down, and they're either going to join us or we're going to remove them. I mean, it's kind of this growing movement. But it's because we protect the blue collar union jobs. They all know it now. All the rank and file know who's standing for their jobs and know who's not. And it's at least 7 mayors. It might even be as high as 10 mayors now on the range have just said, we've had it. The Democrat Party's left us. It's the old blue collar Democrat Party. They no longer fight for blue collar jobs, and that's why they're coming our way.
Yeah, and you think about, we're unique with the Democrat Farm Labor Party, the DFL. And so it's fascinating if the L of DFL is abandoning them. What about the farmers in outstate Minnesota? What are you seeing with that subset, traditional of the DFL?
Yeah, the same thing. I think I was the first one to say it should be the RFL, Republicans Farm and Labor. And the reason being, look at the farm community. I represent 3 out of my 4 counties are all agriculture. And if you go back 20 years, they were all Democrat. They all voted Democrat. There was a representative named Steve Wenzel who now is Republican. He supports Trump, but he was a Democrat representative up there. And in my county, in one of the counties, Morrison County, it's the highest percentage voting for Trump. Last 4 years ago, at least, it was the highest percentage. So that shift is there again, because we're protecting the farmer. If you look at some of the regulations that the Democrats are trying to do, it makes it more and more difficult to farm. And every farmer I know cares about the land deeply. They want to pass it on to the next generation. They're good stewards of the land, but government, Democrat-led government, thinks that they know best and they want to overregulate them. And so they're coming our way. I think the other issue is farmers are socially conservative. They're pro-life. Their family values are huge. They support the Second Amendment. Those are all issues now that are clearly only in the Republican camp.
Fascinating. And, when you look at the Metro left and Democrats, it seems to be, and we're seeing this all across the country, is these sort of metro city states are attempting to dictate policy for everyone, but it seems to be somewhat naive. It's as if they want to have this sort of pristine, untouched land outside of a metro area, but miraculously food and equipment and products and all of this come into the metro from who knows where. And do you see it as, what is it, mainly environmental regulation that's driving a lot of this change in outstate Minnesota, or are there a couple other issues?
Well, it's environmental, but as I mentioned, it's the common sense social conservative issues that in rural are just common sense to support the Second Amendment or protect life from conception to natural death. Those are, I think those are bedrock positions, and we've got to figure out how to reach into Minneapolis and St. Paul too. I mean, their leadership there needs to be replaced. Frankly, Minneapolis City Council, 100% of them wanting to defund or dismantle the police. I mean, they need to throw those guys out. There's a lot of people in Minneapolis that I can't imagine that that's what they want. So, but we got to figure out how to do that. And then the suburbs is kind of in between. I mean, it's and that's where the battlegrounds for the election are. Almost all of the close races are all right around the ring of 494, 694. But we got to figure out how to bring this all together. That's my opinion. When the riots happened and we The governor, frankly, delayed 3 days. He waited way too long. That's on him. We should never let him forget that he is responsible for his lack of reacting there. But then after that, all these businesses that were destroyed. I talked to many of these small business owners. I mean, fearing for their life, their whole life being destroyed. And so now when we're looking at policy, we don't want to bail out Minneapolis St. Paul. That's not what the rural constituents want. But I'm trying to figure out, how do we do policies that, if it helps Minneapolis, it also helps Baudette, Minnesota. So one of the things we recently passed was a provision called Section 179, which we've been trying to do for a while, but it's tax relief for small business owners and farmers. And so even in the midst of this crazy time, I was glad we got that one done.
No, that's actually good to hear. And the desire to be able to make inroads into the metro area. The whole rioting taking place, I found myself down, trying to protect my church in Minneapolis. And, you can drive on Lake Street from uptown all the way to the river, and it is nothing but ruined, burned out buildings, rubble, shattered windows, all of that. I mean, it really did leave a mark. And what are you seeing as far as, I would guess outstate Minnesota is looking at it just as, this is insane. But what are you seeing in the suburbs, particularly when it comes to these hot issues, especially just the violence and the defunding of police?
Yeah, I would say they want Minneapolis and St. Paul to be successful, as do I. But they also want to make sure their streets are safe. When you have Minneapolis and St. Paul candidates, a candidate from St. Paul that's outgoing, traveling to all these suburban communities, Hugo and other places, and just saying we're going to burn your city down too, that offends all of us. And I was surprised, frankly, that candidate Thompson was not reprimanded by his party. The governor, I don't know that he ever withheld his endorsement from him. And so, we've got to figure out how to get beyond that. I went into Minneapolis St. Paul 8 to 10 times just to try to connect to people, learn, understand what was going on. And there's a lot of people that want their streets safe. They are people of deep faith. And those are, I think, some of the things that we can connect on. I remember talking to a Latino pastor, and during the middle of the riots, when the police were nowhere around because they didn't have enough of them, he literally put together a community of members, armed themselves to protect their streets and protect their small businesses. And so, there are places that we can find common ground, and that's what Minnesota's hoping for. Governor's version of one Minnesota is one progressive Minnesota. Minnesota's more like a coin. We have two different sides that are very different. And if we're going to be one Minnesota, we got to figure out how to bring those two sides together. And I'm committed to doing that, but it's not going to be through this progressive left agenda.
Right. And I think that, if you look at what President Trump has done, he seems to have thoroughly broken the mold for the parties and where things stand. This populism, this support for middle America. There are a lot of middle Americans and with that mentality in St. Paul, in Minneapolis, as well as elsewhere, who, their hope is to be able to flourish, to be able to have a building or to have a business, to raise their family in safety, to be able to get a good education. And, those are very much bedrock ideas for us, whereas we're up against this sort of toxic ideology with, what some people are calling cultural Marxism, that goes all the way of defunding the police and things of that nature. And, the crime is just out of control. I'm watching the police scanners, the Twitter feeds, and everyday carjackings, lots of shootings, some people being shot, some people being killed, lots of assaults, lots of robberies. This is no way to live at all. And I've got to imagine that there's going to be a breaking point where people are going to say enough is enough and break out of the pattern.
Yeah, it's happened across our country, but it started here in Minneapolis. I mean, that's the sad part about all this. So my hope and prayer is that we solve it here in Minneapolis, and that also spreads across the whole country. But the Minneapolis police asked for 400 more police officers last January, well in front of this this crisis that we're in with the death of George Floyd and then everything that happened after that. And so when they don't have enough police, then they can't walk the beat, they can't connect into their communities. And so they knew what they needed, but the city of Minneapolis chose to go the opposite direction. And so that's one of the lessons that we have to learn is if there's lawlessness, you can't stop it by appeasement, please stop. I mean, that doesn't work. And that's the approach that the governor took. George Floyd died on a Monday. Tuesday, the looting began. By Wednesday, it was full force. So by Wednesday, you should have called in the National Guard. The mayor asked in detail for help. Thursday, that's when the precinct went down. The police wanted to protect it. They told them to stand down. That by then you already had about 1,000 buildings damaged or destroyed. Friday, another 500 buildings damaged. It wasn't till Saturday that the governor finally called out the National Guard and basically stopped it. And so that's a lesson that we all need to learn is that when people are bent on criminal activity, we have to have a force greater than them to stop them. It's just never okay. And then we address some of the issues that some of the peaceful protesters were talking about. Everybody wants to know that there's justice for them. Everybody. And that's what our country's all about, liberty and justice for all. But you don't do it through lawlessness and rioting and looting.
Absolutely. And, what a lot of Minnesotans, when I'm talking to people, seem to they perceive that there was terrible weakness in leadership by Governor Walz. Do you see this, he's not up for re-election for another 2 years. And do you see this as something that Minnesotans will still remember then, or do you see it as something where this can be, 2 years in the future? Oh, that happened then. This is new. Don't worry about it.
I think Minnesotans are going to remember the lawlessness and the failure to act without a doubt is a big deal. I think when we look back a couple of years from now and look back at COVID, we'll see that the governor made a lot of decisions that really hurt Minnesota. And then even the budget now, we have a big budget deficit. I asked him back in April to start reducing spending 5% per agency. Would have put a far better way to govern next year when we have to balance the budget. And so those are all things that I truly believe that Minnesotans will remember. I mean, this has been a year of crises, and it just doesn't feel like the executive branch did a very good job.
Yeah, and on that COVID, I know we're coming up to about the time limit, but on COVID, we have the governor continuing to put in 30-day emergency powers, things of this nature, and much of the state is still locked down. A lot of people are adjusting and figuring out ways to be able to get around this or work within it. But what do you see on COVID? Will there be opportunities for a change where we say, look, we now know we've got plenty of data. We know who the most vulnerable are. We put protections in for them, and everybody else, live your life. Understand that there's a little bit of a risk, but overall, live your life. Is that something we will see soon?
Well, that's the message that I've been trying to get out there, but the governor is not on that page. He has emergency powers. The only way we remove the emergency powers is for the House and Senate to agree to remove them, and that won't happen unless the House turns over to Republican majority. So it's extremely frustrating because he has this absolute power that nobody is willing to take away from him. At least Democrats are not willing to take away from him. And frankly, I don't think they agree. Many of them don't agree that he's operating within powers that he should. They're just stuck with this political aspect of their own governor using these powers. I mean, think about some of these decisions. When he could have sheltered at home just seniors and vulnerable, he chose to shelter at home everybody. At that moment, I said, Governor, I think you should just shelter at home the seniors and vulnerable. And I didn't realize that he had data that said the results, even though very flawed, estimated way too many people dying, but the results were going to be the same either way. Think about when he said bars can open at 50, but churches can only have 10 open at the exact same time.
Right.
I mean, so zoos have to be closed. Why? I mean, they're outdoors. Schools closing, especially now that we know all that we know. And we learned in the first 3 months a lot. So you could make some of those mistakes early, but making mistakes now, it's totally unacceptable. 40% of the hospitality industry, they estimate, might not make it. 40%. And so we've got to figure out how to do this. Kids in Minneapolis St Paul, communities of color, the kids are falling farther behind because of distance learning. And in Minnesota, they were already way behind in comparison to other populations in other urban areas. And so we got to get them back in school. So all of these things are a result of the governor's emergency powers. I want to remove them. It's been one of the most frustrating things I've had to navigate through. Is we voted 5 times to remove them in the Senate, but they have not in the House.
I can only imagine the frustration. So, you know, a lot of things are very dreary. A lot of folks they're very nervous, scared about the future, even the election, threats of more violence. There just seems to be a bit of a cloud hanging over everyone with COVID and everything else going on. What can you give our viewers and listeners when it comes to hope? What do you see positive moving forward?
Well, I do think that Republicans will keep the majority in the Senate, and so we'll have a place at the table. That's where my hope. Actually, my hope comes from my faith in Jesus. But
Of course.
As far as, and I trust the people, frankly, to figure things out because people want to live their lives free, and they want to be able to pick the job that they want. They want to have the opportunity to love their family and focus on their family, and they don't want government to be a heavy hand over every part of their life. And so I think you'll eventually see people push this off and say, no, we're not going to do this the way the government thinks we should be doing it. So I am hopeful because I trust in God, frankly, and I trust in the people of Minnesota and America to get things right. Sometimes we get it wrong and then we got to make an adjustment. But I just, you look at the third quarter, and the economy's coming back. And if Trump, frankly, is reelected with all his flaws, I have confidence that we will move in the right direction for our economy. He's the one that can help control some of the crazy regulations and give the people of America time to think about what is it that we want to be as a country. And I remind people that on every coin we've got is the secret to our success. It's 3 things. In God we trust, one nation under God. It's a core value of who we are. The second one is liberty, that people want to live their lives free and be responsible for that. And then the third one is the e pluribus unum, which is out of many one. We are one nation under God. And as long as we don't forget that, who we are, I am very confident about the direction that we're going in America, and eventually Minnesota will catch up because we're going to remove the governor 2 years from now.
Well, Senator, thank you so much for sharing your time. I know it's a very busy season. We're just a few days out from the election. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us now. And thank you, too, for your many years of public service. I think that's something to be commended. And thank you to your wife and family as well, because I know that the burden is shared by the whole family, not just by the one individual who's in public office. So thank you for that. Thank you to our viewers and listeners for joining us for this very good countdown to the election episode. Join us at noon today. We have Eric Ager coming on to talk about voter fraud and the concerns that are there, and to let us know what's happening around the country when it comes to that topic. This has been another episode of First Tuesday Conservatives Countdown to the Election, co-hosted by Alpha News and Charlemagne Institute, of which I am the CEO. And check out Intellectual Takeout and Chronicles Magazine, which we publish. Thank you very much, Senator, and thank you to our viewers.